Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we'll go over just why politics as a career is a bad idea, why those who go down that path, well, they can never truly be trusted, and why the entire fact that working in politics can be a career is exactly what's kind of destroyed everything that our country was supposed to be. And while we're going down the path of talking about people's political philosophies, we might as well stop off at a former state senator who's, well, I guess technically at the end of the year they become a former state senator, who's become the quintessential never Trumper and has completely lost his mind in the process. Also, we'll go over how as this ex-Republican state senator is leaving, he's dropped the mantle of putting forward gun control laws as being the Republican to put those forward. So another Republican has went ahead and picked up the mantle. I guess she decided she wanted to go ahead and be the next person knocked off in the House in a political primary. We'll go over that. And then finally, I'll go turn to national politics. Anybody who watched the show any length of time knows that I'm a sportsman, I'm a hunter. I get out there in the outdoors, and Walls had his unfortunate hunting videos come out and points to a few things. But also, I think it overall goes to a part of what's going on in the Harris campaign. They do seem to be in a little bit of a tailspin. We'll go over why I think that and what I see going on. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Those of you watching on TV or listening on the radio, you can check out the Andrew Cooperrider Show over at theandrewshow.com. More than just this one episode a week comes out, and you can listen to it on all major podcasting platforms. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com and hit the contact tab. I do want to say something to those of you emailing in. I am seeing your emails and your stories, and I am putting them on the list of things to cover. When I first started out this show and started doing it more than once a week, a lot of people questioned, how can you do in this case it'd be 40-something minutes at the time, show every day, 5 days a week on Kentucky politics? How's there enough to cover? There's just surely not enough going on. Well, as I quickly found out, not the case, and I'm running into that now where there's so many stories going on about so many things happening at a state level that I'm having a hard time getting to all stories. So those of you emailing in and sending me those things, I am getting to them. Now, before we dig down into our stories, I do want to take a second to hopefully push you guys to making some actions out there in the real world. And it comes first with getting out there and making sure you're hitting doors for your favorite candidates. There's a lot going on nationally. I hear you're watching a lot about Harris and Walls and all them. But I do want to take a second to remind everybody how important local elections are. Not only, of course, do they have, in large parts, greater impact on your day-to-day life when you think about things like who can fight the federal government for you. Well, your state certainly can. They have a lot more money to do so. We've seen the Attorney General Coleman certainly going after the Biden administration quite a bit here out of Kentucky. But also when you look at who's making the laws that affect your everyday life, who's administering the federal policies, about the only thing the federal government has a lot of control over that your local governments don't is they do have a pretty good share of your taxes, though of course your state and local governments as well also have access to those monies coming from the federal government, but also they tax themselves, of course. And they have control over the money supply. So things like inflation, obviously to the cost of goods in large part can be affected by federal government. But when it comes to like your day-to-day, your roads, your bridges, your fire, your police, what gets you arrested, that's largely covered by your local government. So they're incredibly important races. And on top of them having more effect on your daily lives, also they are feeders into the federal government. When we look at Joe Biden, his first elected position was on county council. which is the equivalent of a county magistrate here in Kentucky, a local level race where you're elected by maybe a few thousand people. Kamala Harris, running on the Democrat side right now, was a local prosecutor. When we look at our own federal delegation here in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell was a judge executive. Thomas Massie was a judge executive. Comer was a state house rep. Guthrie was a state senator. Hal Rogers was a local level elected attorney. And the list goes on and on and on. As we dig into it, we see that more and more of these people are coming from your local level elected positions, and then they move up from there. So on top of just affecting your daily lives more, it also can help change what's going on at the federal level. And I make this call because we are coming up on it, and there's some important races going on, one of which involves Thomas Jefferson in the 45th House District. Now, I was out knocking doors for Thomas Jefferson this past Saturday, and I want to make sure I invite everybody to come on out and knock doors for Thomas Jefferson this upcoming weekend. Saturday at 10 a.m. at Dogwood Trace Park. We will be meeting. We'll provide coffee and donuts and bagels and things, and we will gather together. You'll hear from Thomas Jefferson himself, and then we'll get out there and hit some doors. And I want to encourage you to show up. If you never knocked doors for a candidate before, it's a great opportunity for you to come out, learn how to do so. We'll go ahead and throw the graphic up as well for those of you watching the video format, but I'll also be making some posts on my social media about this specific event. So that way, any of you who are interested in joining us can go ahead and mark your calendars and do so. And it's an important race, and it's a race that in large part, it's funny, the House Republicans, the party as a whole, really Republican establishment as a whole has wrote it off. And this is super common. And they don't want to get involved in these races. They don't heavily support candidates when those candidates have taken down one of their favorites. In this case, Thomas Jefferson took down Killian Timoney after being outspent 10-1. Thomas Jefferson took down Killian Timoney with a massive 75-ish% of the vote share. It's a huge blowout in the win of Thomas Jefferson. And so they're pretty upset about it. They're still pretty sore over the loss. And so, of course, they're not interested in seeing Thomas Jefferson win. But this is what's incredibly important, is when we get out there and we support candidates who the establishment doesn't want to see win, and we show those candidates that, hey, look, you don't need them. You don't need their support. You don't need their money. We have your back. We, the grassroots, will help get you elected. We'll get you over that finish line. So that's why I want to encourage you all to turn out and knock doors for that. Now, if you can't make it to Lexington to knock doors for Thomas Jefferson, just pick a local candidate of any kind. Even if you're a Democrat, I hate watching this. I encourage you, get out there and knock doors locally and actually talk to people. And we'll cover this later on in the show, how I think that's one of the Democrats' hardest problems that they have right now going on for them, is they are stuck in an echo chamber and they just don't realize, like, what do normal, real people think? Not those crazy leftists with crazy leftist views, but what do people think who, like, are normal? The people they're trying to win over that, according to all polling, they're doing pretty horrible with, having a hard time with. So we'll go over that at the end of the show, but coming up after this break, we'll go over how a career in politics, how, there's actually a lot wrong with that, how the fact that it can be a career leaves a lot of questions and obviously can lead to some pretty crazy thoughts and statements. And in a large part, when we look at the Republican Party, what's affecting it, what's kind of corrupting it, we can look at those who are trying to make a career out of politics and say, that's the problem right there. And I'll give you the latest example of that. After this short break, you'll listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So obviously, those of you who pay any kind of attention at all to what's going on in our state politically knows that there's a big fight going on over the School Choice Amendment, Amendment 2. And obviously, that'll be on your ballot this November. You should vote yes for the amendment. But regardless, we've been seeing, in a large part, especially the left side of the aisle, coming together to really put together good coordinated efforts to go ahead and defeat the amendment. On the right side, we've seen some groups here or there doing some good work. They are certainly targeting people. I believe we've gotten a mailer for Yes on 2 2 or 3 times this past week alone here in Lexington, where I live. But the left certainly has their grassroots efforts together. I think there's less ideological problems on the Democrat side of things. They don't have any qualms about how they win. They don't have any qualms about the tools they use to get the job done. They come together and they get the job done. And the party itself is more willing to share resources, and individuals working in it are more willing to share resources than on the Republican side. And a lot of people wonder why that is. And simply put, it's because on the Democrat side of thing, what the Democrats want, what the grassroots Democrats want and the Democrats on the front line want, largely are not a problem with the donor base. The corporations, the big tech moguls, the donors that give for ideological reasons or give in order to get the policies they want to see put in place. What the grassroots, what the front line, what their base wants and what those donors want are not against each other, because Democrat base wants larger government. Democrat base wants the government to spend more money. Democrat base believes that government can solve all of our problems by just peddling out the dollar bills. They don't actually have an issue with government doing a whole lot of anything as long as they're enforcing their viewpoints. But on the conservative Republican base, those individuals, those voters like myself and most likely like you, we want to see a smaller government. We want to see government regulate less. We want to be taxed less. We want to see government spend less. And all those things I'm saying are a big problem to donors who aren't donors but investors, and they want to receive a payoff for their money. But if government does less and pays out less, well, how are these investors going to get a return on their investment or their donations? That's in large part what the issue is. And so these big money heavy hitters in the Republican Party has had a hard time trying to figure out how to handle their grassroots. They have a hard time with Trump as well. They say, how do we keep them on board and get their support while at the same time continue to rake in those dollar bills from the corrupt forces that want us to continue to do things that our grassroots and our base doesn't want us to do. And in large part, we see this coming to a head when it comes to the school choice issue and some of the establishment responses, because they are getting pulled in multiple directions. For an example, and a big part of the reason why untold story here is that a lot of the school choice activists and grassroots workers have been the individuals that have been behind removing some establishment members, especially in the state house, from office. People like Sal Santoro, people like Ed Massey, people like Killian Timoney, people like Adam Koenig. These are some of the favorites of establishment Republicans because they did the work of the donors. They did the work of the investors. But that's why they got removed from office. And so now the establishment has lost their hatchetmen. They're people that go and get it, and they're being picked off. And the people who are doing it, in large part, a big chunk of them are school choice advocates, because it just so happened that these hatchetman donor class were also doing the work of the teachers unions because, well, they peddle out some money, and we'll go into that here in a second. And so because of that, some of the establishment really doesn't like too much the school choice efforts and kind of wants the issue to die. But even though they want to try really hard to stop the march of school choice, we did see the Republican Party of Kentucky do something this past weekend that's pretty remarkable. They passed a resolution supporting Amendment 2. Makes sense considering school choice is a part of our Republican Party platform, but regardless, it is still pretty remarkable to see that kind of strength, especially when you consider what some of these establishment members think about it, or at least those who get a career out of politics. And I want to point out this particular person, and I tweeted about this, is Jake Cox. Now, some of you who listen to the show for some time may already know who Jake Cox is. He was Rand Paul's former campaign manager. He also worked on Ryan Quarles' campaign in the primary for governor. But I think he also worked for Allison Baldwin during the general. But something happened. You see, Jake Cox wants to make and has politics as a career. What that means is that, well, he can't be ideologically tied down. He instead wants to be able to just work for whoever he wants to work for as long as he can make a profit. And this past election cycle, he took tens and thousands of dollars of fees for managing a heavily funded campaign that was heavily funded by the teachers unions and the horse tracks. And that PAC that was paying him, they were trying to take down the conservative members of our House and try to protect some more establishment members of the legislature. Now, of course, they lost almost every single one of the races they got involved in because they're trying to essentially sell lies. They're trying to convince a bunch of conservatives and Republicans to vote against what they say they believe in. But Jay Cox, having done that, received now the ire from the grassroots of the Republican Party because they frankly don't have time to deal with individuals that, well, are willing to sell themselves out to whoever will pay them the most. But in order to excuse this behavior, individuals like Jay Cox have to come up with an excuse as to why somehow the Republican Party is supposed to allow things like teachers unions dumping money into primaries and allow former Democrats to go ahead and just, receive support. And this thought process is infecting our party and will end up destroying it because we hear a lot of people talk about, we hear this phrase all the time, like from Texas and other places where they say, don't California my Texas, or don't California my Kentucky even, where people are moving from these blue liberal states that have become literal trash heaps that tax too high and have homeless issues and are absolutely insane. And now, well, they're coming into red states. But instead of coming into these red states and recognizing, hey, maybe it's those policies that we're supporting that are the problem, they instead bring those same policies with them and think, well, maybe we'll put them in place here, but we'll just stop at some point. They never take a moment to recognize that it's the initial base beliefs they had that led to the problems that are before us. So, in the same way that those people, California up Kentucky, we have individuals coming over to the Republican Party because the Democrat Party has literally lost their mind, or they come over to the Republican Party because they simply want to win, and they really don't leave much behind. They actually bring a lot of their liberal beliefs into the party. And I've given examples of people running right now. For example, Vanessa Grossel running against Sherilyn Stevenson, a Republican, reportedly, who recently changed to the party, but instead continues to have some liberal leanings and beliefs, evident from the fact that if you start really talking policy with her, as I have, you'll start hearing somebody who's clearly not conservative. Now, people like Jay Cox would tell you that, hey, you should support that person anyways just because they throw an R next to their name. And if you think I'm lying, you'd be mistaken because Jay Cox took issue with the Republican Party going ahead and endorsing the school choice amendment this past weekend. And he tweeted out saying, hot take, which anytime somebody starts off with hot take, that's a pretty good indication they're about to give you one of the stupidest takes in the world, which Jay Cox does prove the rule on. Hot take, the KYGOP should not be endorsing policy positions. It's not the job of a political party to get involved on constitutional amendments. Let me read that again. They should not be endorsing policy positions? What is a political party for then? Is a political party platform nothing more than hopes and dreams of certain individuals? Or is it not the policy positions of the Republican Party? Is the party platform just something that somebody somewhere wrote down and has nothing to do with the party? What is the point of the party? The entire point of a party is that they have a series of beliefs in their party platform. And then their position and point is that to elect people who follow that platform. That's what their stated beliefs are. Now, there's some argument over whether or not the party should be adjudicating who is following the policies or not, or should that be left to simply the Republican Party voters to decide, and that's a conversation and a debate worth merit. But what's not worth merit is a claim that a party should have no policy positions at all. It is the party's job to cast a vision of what does make a Republican, and then cast that vision to individuals so that way when they're in the primary, what they're considering is who best represents that vision. That is the party's job. But to Jake Cox, he doesn't want parties getting involved in that. Literally, when I called him out on this, his response was that the party's job is just to go ahead and elect anybody with an R next to their name, like somebody just threw on a jersey. This isn't a sports team. It's not like when people like Vanessa Grasso got traded to our team, even though they were our enemy 2 years ago. Well, now they're a part of the team, so we should cheer them on and hope that they do good and win. No, this isn't a sports team. This is politics, and the decisions these people make have real ramifications on our lives. Now, of course, people trying to make a career out of politics like Jake don't want you to think that way because they don't want to lose their jobs. You see, Jake is, as I understand it, is slated or trying to run the campaign for Andy Barr when in the primary for the Senate here in 2 years. And if everybody in the GOP and the grassroots hates Jake right off the bat, well, that's not very good for him. And Jake's running into some problems because of the way he's mouthing off here. It's burning his former employers like Rand Paul. Coming up after this, speaking about Republicans who don't seem to understand what it means to be a Republican, Senator Whitney Westerfield, hot take on Trump. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider show. So there's individuals out there that over time, for whatever reason, when they get elected to office, end up changing their viewpoints. And actually, I was listening to Tulsi Gabbard on some podcasts recently, kind of talking about it. In large part, it has to deal with the fact that you don't want to be ostracized by the people up in D.C. On the congressional side, when you switch to the state level, of course, you don't have D.C., you have Frankfurt. But when you live out in Western Kentucky, 4 hours away from Frankfurt, it might as well be D.C. You spend so much time there. And you forget, especially when you're not often challenged. And, to be quite honest, Senate seats out west, especially in the state Senate, are not often challenged. In order for somebody to challenge a state senator, they have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to campaign. But they also have to be in a position where they're willing to literally drive 4 hours away and give up months at home to be in Frankfurt. And so it's already hard to find people willing to do the job, but people are willing to do it. And those individuals that get elected, even if they had strong conservative beliefs, as somebody like retiring state senator Whitney Westerfield claims to have had at some point, but even he admits he changed over time. And we go into why do you change over time? Well, it's because you get up to Frankfurt and you want to fit in with everybody. And one of those things that he decided he wanted to go ahead and fit in with deals with CAR, Crisis Aversion Rights Retention. And it was a gun control law he put forward. Now, Whitney Westerfield, in his process to shift full leftist, and I think he's probably going to try for a state Supreme Court seat here, that's maybe, or a state appeals judgeship. Maybe that's what he's setting up for himself, something nonpartisan, because he's certainly trying to appeal to the left. But once you already have been called out by the right on one thing, you just start going left. You're just like, well, since they don't like me, I guess, and I got some attention from the left, I'll just go ahead and work with those people because they seem to just like me more, because it's not about principles anymore. We see this with Liz Cheney. And as evidence with that with Whitney Westerfield, we have this recent tweet where he retweeted something, a video from Trump, where Trump asked, do you want the black president or white president? Let's play that video of what Trump had to say.
Would you rather have the black president or the white president who got $1.7 billion off the price? I think they want the white guy right now.
Whitney Westerfield just tweets that out and says, abhorrent, a poison to the heart and soul of America, not worthy of a single vote. So this is a reported Republican who's calling out Trump for that statement you just heard there. Now, if Trump on his own was just suddenly coming out and saying, look, do you really want a black president? Come on. Sure, that would be awful. That would be racism. But what Trump is actually doing is calling out racism on the other side. Racism that apparently Whitney Westerfield supports. What do I mean? Well, in context, what Trump was calling out there dealt with this video from Obama where he was talking to black men. Apparently, Kamala Harris is just polling awful with black men. And so therefore, Obama had to come out and chastise them.
Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. Mm-hmm. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. Mm-hmm. So now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down? That's not acceptable.
So how would you respond to that if you're Trump? You have a guy saying, look, you don't want to vote for Kamala Harris and you're cooking up all these reasons, but you need to vote for her because she's black. And so what Trump was saying there was, okay, so you've got a black president who sucks, and you got a white president who did a good job. Which president are you going to vote for? Because the black one just because they're black, or are you going to vote for the white president? Which one do you want, the black one or the white one? That's the point he's making. He's combating the left's own racism of saying that black men need to detract themselves from policies, from how politics affects them, from what's going on there, and simply vote for somebody because they are black, which that drives division. That's racism. But Whitney Westfield doesn't have a problem with that. His problem was when Trump responds to it to point out the racism. That's the part that's abhorrent. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, at least Whitney Westfield is leaving the state Senate, so no longer will we have to worry about his policies. But this goes back to what I mean about these leftists infecting our party and people like Jake Cox saying, hey, if you throw an R next to your name, we got to support you. Without saying like, well, maybe it depends on the situation. I've said this time and time again on this show. A lot of it depends with the situation. I mean, I make no bones about the fact that I'm not a big fan of Andy Barr. Largely because Andy Barr, and for those of you unaware of why I'm not a big fan of his, because while there was these arguments going on about funding, whether or not it's good to fund the Ukraine war or not, Andy Barr would come back home and he would make full-throated speeches about how important it is we fund the Ukraine war. He spent more time on more speeches in 2022 talking about the Ukraine war and funding it than he spent talking about getting our own fiscal house in order before we send dollars overseas. That's why I don't like the guy. It's policy reasons. Personally, I don't know much about him. But policy-wise, I have a big problem with the politician who spends longer talking about why my money needs to go overseas than he spends talking about how our money needs to be spent better here at home. Whether or not you believe we should be funding Ukraine, put that to the side. You should at least recognize that those dollars being spent isn't nearly as important as informing me on what's going on with my federal government and what you're doing to fulfill your Republican principles of spending less money and shrinking the size of government, and you never talk about it. No, instead you talk about sending things overseas. Now, when I hear Thomas Massie speak, that's mainly what he talks about, is what he's doing in order to shrink the size of government, what bills he's proposing, what he is actively doing to make a difference in our lives on Republican principles. That's why I like Massie, that's why I don't like Barr, so I'm not secretive about it. However, we have a close House, federally speaking. We have Thomas Massie in the Rules Committee right now in the House as well. So when I vote for Andy Barr, I'm not voting for Andy Barr per se. I'm voting for the Republicans to have a majority because it's so close. I'm voting in order to put Thomas Massie in the Rules Committee. I'm voting to put Comer as the chair of the House Oversight Committee. That's what I'm voting for. Because, of course, if the Republicans lose control of the House, they don't have Republicans in those positions. However, as I've said before, when you have chambers like the House, which is 80% Republican, and Senate, which is about 80% Republican, and you're nowhere close to losing your majority, yeah, you need to shut off some of these awful Republicans. You don't need to support every single Republican, every single general, and sometimes there's really good reasons not to support them. And that brings about who's picking up the Whitney Westerfield mantle on gun control, Kim Banta. Now, Kim Banta was already, Representative Banta, she's already in a precarious position. I have no idea who she thinks she is in the thought process of, does she think she's like safe or something? And what I mean by that is that Kim Banta is in northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky is known as a place that knocks off less than conservative establishment Republicans. I mean, we saw, as I mentioned earlier, Sal Santorum, Adam Koenig, Ed Massey, all taken down. Ed Massey twice. All taken down. We saw Kim Mosier, way too close for comfort, in her last primary. And Kim Banta is living in the same area. And yet she thinks she's perfectly fine to do these anti-conservative things. And just how bad is Kim Banta? Well, she's already ranked now the lowest Republican, conservative-wise, in the House by the Family Foundation. It used to be Killian Timoney, but of course, he's gone. Now it's Kim Banta. In fact, last time I looked, I believe there was 4 or 5 Democrats who were rated more conservative than Kim Banta. But to make sure you know that she's not very conservative, she put forward a new law she's pushing on guns. We'll go over what that law is after this short break. And if we have time, we'll touch on the national election. Well, that coming up here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Kim Banta out of Northern Kentucky has decided she's going to take a big risk in putting a nail in the coffin of her political career here in Kentucky. And I say that because, as I remember, every single person who's supported some kind of gun control law as a Republican in our state legislature over the last 4 or 6 years, who's sponsored that legislation, has found themselves one way or another out of office within the next election cycle or two. Like, it didn't take long. Because obviously, it's not just that they're proposing gun laws, but it's that they're the kind of person to do so. They're completely disconnected from their electorate. They forgot who voted for them, who elected them. It isn't your buddies up in Frankfurt that you feel like you belong with better, but it's like, the voters who have a certain beliefs and values that you're supposed to reflect, and you're not reflecting those. And so what does Kim Banta put forward? Well, Kim Banta put forward a bill with the primary co-sponsor of Tina Bojanowski, Democrat out of Louisville, who I didn't know. She was the one who got disqualified from the ballot, but then somehow was let back in. It's a long story there. But anyways, so they provide a draft of a 2-page bill to the Lantern, online liberal kind of publication here for Kentucky, that says parents and guardians can be civilly responsible for any negligence or willful misconduct of a minor. What they're saying here is they want that parents and other guardians would be considered responsible and subject to paying civil damages under any of these circumstances. They permitted to have a firearm. They know that the minor has previously been adjudicated delinquent of an offense that would be a felony if the minor had been an adult. They know that the minor has a propensity to commit violent acts. They know or have reason to know that the minor intends to use the firearm for unlawful purposes. The bill excludes minors or governments or private agencies or foster parents who, through court orders, are assigned responsibility for a minor. Kim Banta says my key motivator is just trying to get people to recognize that even though we live in a society where it is perfectly legal to own and use guns, I think we need to back up for a minute. We need to say, okay, I'm a gun owner, but that is going to extend to me being responsible for my children's use of guns. She goes on to say, I'm not restricting guns. I'm not telling you cannot buy your child a gun. What I'm telling you is that just be as aware you are responsible for that child with that gun as you are with a car. So if they do some damages or they threaten people, you're going to be responsible civilly for it. Banta already has favorably discussed her bill with the Speaker of the House, David Osborne, and believes there's appetite to pass such legislation. It's just a matter of being very, very responsible with your gun ownership, Banta said. Rather than a Sandy Hook or a Georgia incident, I'm hoping that parents will say, yeah, no, you're 16, you're not old enough to be on your own with a gun, or, well, I don't know where you are with a gun. So I just want to stop there for a second. Well, actually, she goes on to say, and I think this is important, she goes on to say, I'm not telling a parent you can't let your child go hunting by themselves anymore, and he's 15 or 16. I'm just telling you that if he goes and shoots a neighbor and kills their cow, you're responsible. You're going to pay for that cow. You are responsible. Okay, so there's already plenty of laws on the books that say, and plenty of case law that say when a child does something to damage property, the parent is responsible for those damages. They can be sued for those damages, and the parent's responsible for it. You don't need a new law for that. So why are guns being singled out? And I think it's important that we point at this hunting by themselves thing. First off, Kim Banta, she's she's clearly not researching the laws she's talking about. Because in Kentucky, it is not legal for you to hunt on your own without a parent or guardian or adult unless you are 16 or older. So when she makes the statement, I'm not telling a parent you can't let your child go hunting by themselves anymore and he's 15 or 16, she is mistaken. Your child cannot go hunting by themselves at the age of 15. I don't, as Kim Banta sitting here talking about responsible gun ownership and we need to be careful with our law, we need to be aware of guns. Maybe she should be aware of what the laws are on the books right now before she goes ahead and speaks on a subject. She is a state house rep putting forward a bill dealing with minors holding guns. Maybe she should know what age children can go hunting on their own. So you're already, though, talking about sending your 16-year-old out hunting alone. She's talking about, well, if they go and shoot a cow, they could be liable. Okay, I hear you. Willful misconduct. Why are you singling out guns there? What you're effectively doing is saying that you have to eliminate all possibility that you could be told that you are dealing in a negligent way. So what that would mean in this case is you can make an argument that, well, they're under 18, so they shouldn't be on their own. So this bill does effectively stop hunting past 16. It does. She even admits it. She says, I'm not saying you can't go by yourselves anymore, just you're going to be liable if they do anything wrong, if they go hunting by themselves. Okay, and if you're putting a law specifically on the books saying that I'm going to be held with an extra fine, because remember, when you create a law like this, saying you can be civilly liable for something, what they often are writing is not just, hey, you can be liable for the use of guns. They're writing that there's certain exact amounts of money to go with it. Obviously, we haven't seen the bill yet to know exactly what the amount you can be sued for is. The question, they're going to prescribe actual values in the bill. And we know that they're going to add money on top of it. So this is why they're singling out guns, because there's already laws in the books. They're going to be adding in more money to the civil penalties here. And it's obvious because they talk about in here, in the article, about threatening with a gun, okay? In her own words, in Kim Banta's own words, she says, so if they do some damage or they threaten people, you're going to be responsible civilly for it. But the hard part when it comes to threatening somebody is in order to be held civilly responsible for something, you have to cause damages typically. Like you have to physically have caused some damage to myself that I have to pay for. Basically, you have to have cost me money. So if your kid goes out and threatens somebody, perhaps you could make an argument that, well, they threatened me in my home, so I had to buy a security system, and I bought myself a gun to protect myself, so I'm suing you for the cost of the alarm and the gun. I mean, you can maybe make that kind of argument, but just threatening somebody with a gun doesn't actually inflict any kind of monetary damages per se. Some exact ones, I guess you could maybe say, well, it's for mental distress and therapy. That's another option. But that means she's going to subscribe in this bill specific amounts of money, singling out the use of guns. Because the other thing you're sending a message about, and this is the real problem, is that you're claiming that it's the guns. The guns are the problem, or the parents are the problem in how they store guns. And that's not it at all. Storage isn't the real issue here. Now, it may be the issue if a 10-year-old finds a gun and mishandles it and shoots somebody or themselves. Yes, storage is an issue. But storage isn't an issue when a 15-year-old shoots up a school. A parent is the issue, I agree. But it's not because of the gun. Because there are tons of kids who maybe their parents lock up guns, but they know exactly how to get to them. I know growing up, I knew exactly where my parents' guns were. But you know what I never did? Go shoot up a school. You know what I never did? Threaten anybody with a gun as a child. Never did it. And in fact, as I'm saying that, if we're all honest with ourselves, we know lots of people. And you yourself probably grew up knowing exactly how to get a hold of guns if you wanted to as a child. Under the age of 18. You knew how to get into your parents' safe or where they were stashing guns at in the house or yada, yada, yada. And you never shut up anything. And that's the real problem I have with this piece of legislation. Is that you're saying it's the fault of the parent's storage. If you want to blame the parent, maybe I'm on board with you. But it's got nothing to do with providing guns to anybody. It's got to do with the fact that you're a cruddy parent. And objectively speaking, and I know kids do bad things all the time. But I would say, kind of objectively speaking, if you're like 14-year-old is a mass shooter and shoots up a school, you've probably failed as a parent. At that point, you're parental failure. I do think that. I'll defend that position. If your child commits mass murder at 14, you have screwed up as a parent. That's the problem that needs to be addressed. Not, did you lock up your guns properly? But then even if you lock them up, I haven't seen the bill, but even if you locked them up, and the kid somehow got access because they know how to get into it. They know what the code is. They've seen you enter it, let's say. So they get access and get the gun. Is it still your fault? Because you showed them how to shoot? Could they blame you then? There's a lot of problems here, and I'm sure as the bill comes out, we'll dig into it more. I want to talk about national politics. Ran out of time. We'll go over that tomorrow. We also will be digging into the state Supreme Court race between Izzo and Goodwin. Izzo and Goodwin. This week we'll have all that and more, so head over to theandrewshow.com. Hit the Listen Now tab. Till then, we'll be seeing you.